Well, I still see a few people probably trickling in. We had the minor hiccup with the registration link, but I think in the interest of time, we can get things started. First off, thank you to Danish Clean Tech Hub. Thank you to all our panelists. My name is Peter Peralt. I am the director and head of circular economy for NL North America. Um, and I'm really excited about this panel. It's focusing on some key issues that I've already heard throughout the week with Circular City Week around renewables and technology, and also electrification of transportation. And within the city context, I think it's a growing topic of interest. And we're joined here today by some experts in the field from a variety of different locations and a variety of different disciplines. So I think it's really going to be a fun discussion. Briefly, I'd like to go over a little bit about the NL Group and NL North America, and then I'm going to turn it over to Vinny Rashika, who can do the same for our co-hosts over at Arup. And then from there, we'll set the stage for the audience and introduce the rest of our panelists, and then dig into what is hopefully a lively and vibrant discussion. So for those of you that are based in North America, NL is a large multinational energy company. Our global headquarters are in Rome. We have about 70 million customer base with about 65,000 employees in roughly 32 countries. But in North America, a lot of folks haven't heard of us because we are what you would call an independent power producer. And so we do not own any utilities, whereas in other parts of the world, we have enough transmission and distribution lines to run from the Earth to the moon 4 times. And so in parts of the world, such as Chile or Italy or Spain, we may be a household name, but here in North America, we have 3 business lines. Again, NL Green Power North America. We also have our NLX business line, which is focused on digitization, electrification, and decarbonization. And then there's the energy and commodity management business line, which was formerly known as NL Trading, but a couple of years ago, we deliberately did a rebranding because of our focus on circularity and commodities. The commodities of the energy sector from the past century are not the same commodities that we're looking at for the energy sector in this century. And I misspoke. There's actually 4 business lines now because our e-mobility division is now a standalone business line known as NLX Way. And so very happy to be joined with some colleagues from those various parts of the company. But I'll turn it over to Vinny first for a quick overview on Arup, and then we can dig into the key themes and goals of the session.
Thanks, Peter. My name is Vinny Rashika. I'm a senior planner with Arup. For those of you who don't know Arup, we similarly have a larger presence outside of the United States. We're a UK-based firm, but we have about 1,500 staff across across the Americas region, and we're a multidisciplinary engineering and consulting firm. We've been traditionally have done a lot of work in the building space, have been more recently doing a lot of larger infrastructure projects, and planning and consulting, which is the team that I sit within. Our company is held by a charitable trust, which means what does that mean? That means that basically we're able to stick to our mission, which is to shape a better world, and we're able to chart our own path. Some examples of how we're doing that in the realm of circularity is stepping away from projects as of April 2022 in the oil and gas extraction field, and decarbonizing our portfolio. Another thing that it means is that we're also able to take portions of our profits, invest those into research and development and ventures to boost our value to clients and solve complicated challenges like fleet transition, for example. And we do that through our internal Arup University and Invest in Arup programs, which we can apply funding to these types of challenges. And so some of the examples we'll talk about today are the Charge for All and Charge for Fleets tools that we've developed to support site suitability analysis for charging infrastructure and better outcomes for fleet transition, and our newly launched circular building design tool, which we worked on with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And I think there are links to those that you can follow up on, but that's a quick overview. Back to you, Peter.
That's great, Vinny. Thank you very much. Well, I just wanted to kind of set some key themes and goals that we're going to be discussing in the conversation. Obviously, we're focusing on sustainable zero emission vehicle fleet transitions, but how does that relate to circularity? And I think that, hopefully those of you attending Circular City Week are well aware that circularity starts in the design phase. And for Enel, we understand that we are often upstream players in the value chain, right? By providing our customers with renewable energy, we are helping enable that by providing sustainable and circular inputs. And for Arab, their process starts at design and planning. And so it makes a lot of sense to us as we look at the transition to decarbonization. You have to include the entire value chain. And so your scope 1 direct emissions is certainly a part of it. Your scope 2 indirect emissions from purchased electricity, but then scope 3 is essentially everything else. The equipment that you're purchasing has embodied carbon associated with it. It has emissions associated with the manufacturing of it, the use of that equipment, obviously, and then what happens to that at its end of useful life. And so what that leads us to believe is that a multi-stakeholder approach is really key to the transition. And so that's why you're going to hear from folks that are working in the technology space. You're going to hear from public administration and public officials that are planning this for cities on the ground, as well as the utility space. So multi-stakeholder approach is going to really drive the outcomes that are going to provide the most social, environmental, and ultimately economic benefits. But there are some challenges associated with that as well. In North America, we know that the transition is not happening quite as quickly as it is in other parts of the world. And so we're going to add some international perspectives from our colleague in Chile, who is overseeing a very significant transformation of the Santiago public transit system, and try to glean some lessons out of that and understand, where there were challenges up front, how they were addressed, and then what was successful and hopefully can be repeatable. And really, I think that the message that I hope people take away is that wherever organizations are on their journey, whether you're a commercial and industrial organization with a large fleet, if you're a transit operator, a port authority, or a city that owns your own fleet, looking at the benefits from a holistic perspective, while sometimes daunting and perhaps even complex, is really going to identify the maximum amount of value you can do with a fleet transformation of this nature. And so with that, I'd like to switch over and just introduce our panelists. First, we are joined by Sergio Carvajal, who is a business and development sales lead for NLX Chile. He works in the electric public transport sector, coordinating mobility projects with different stakeholders in a number of different public entities to provide customized solutions that are going to help adopt this technology at scale. He's previously worked for the National Electromobility Department with the Ministry of Transport, and he's developed projects for the public sector to achieve their goals of electrification and decarbonization in tandem with the government. And so, Sergio, please say hello and share with us, if you would, one fun fact about yourself.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Peter. Thank you for this opportunity. I work in NLX in Chile, and well, some fun fact, I love to do sports. I really consider myself a sportsman, and I have run the last triathlon in Chile, having a semi-good results.
Glad to hear it. Well, thank you again for joining us. Next up is our colleague, Karen Su. She leads the utility and municipal government business for NLX in North America. That business itself has expanded into an investor-owned, its investor-owned utility portfolio significantly, and the electric vehicle, smart charging products, and energy management services that NLX is able to offer. She's got over a decade of experience working on software development, utility enterprise solutions, sales and development teams, software implementations, and so really bringing that technology perspective and also the interaction in working with utilities from XL to PG&E, Southern Cal Edison, and several others. Karen, please say hello and share with us your fun fact.
Hi everyone, my name is Karen Su. Fun fact for me is I was actually sales rep #1 here in North America for NLX's e-mobility team. So lots of projects under me and really excited to just ride the future of e-mobility with the team.
Employee one. I didn't know that myself. Excellent. Next, I'd like to introduce Rebecca Kiernan. She is the Principal Resilience Officer with the City of Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania, where she works on developing and implementing initiatives such as their resilience strategy, investment prospectus, equity indicator reports, climate adaptation analysis, and supports all aspects of the city's climate action plan on urban forest and vehicle electrification. She's constantly focusing on building social, ecological, economic, and physical resilience to citywide shocks and stresses. And Rebecca, please say hello and share with us a fun fact.
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. My fun fact is one of my favorite days at work was when I got to go to the scrapyard to watch our diesel garbage trucks get scrapped. Super fun. Highly recommended.
That's excellent. That's excellent. And next up, Ryan Patterson, who works at Con Edison in New York City as part of their EV Power Ready program. He's tasked with building nearly 20,000 EV chargers in New York City and southern Westchester County in the next 3.5 years, it looks like. And that's going to support the city and state's EV adoption goals. He previously worked with New York ISO, where he wrote market rules in wholesale energy markets and capacity markets. And prior to that was working at RMI, Rocky Mountain Institute, where he put together a business plan for an all-electric rideshare business and charging facility. Ryan, thank you for joining us. And what is your fun fact?
Hey, Peter, thanks for having me. My fun fact is I'm working electric vehicles and I don't own a car for the first time in my life.
Oh, hey, that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. That's great. Last but not least, Vinny, I think you had a little bit of chance to introduce Arup, but you haven't really been able to introduce yourself. You are a senior planner with Arup's interdisciplinary zero emission mobility planning team. I think we're going to learn plenty about what you do and want to dig into the discussion, but share with us your fun fact, because the one that you shared with me I thought was pretty good, unless you changed your mind.
The one thing I said is that I live in a multi-city household. My wife is from Boston, and so I've used my experience living on 3 continents to manage that, particularly during baseball season. I was going to add that I also play an Arup softball team, and my next game will be my 100th, which is a big milestone, I guess.
Excellent, excellent. Well, again, panelists, thank you all for joining us. Really just want to dig into it. And Rebecca, if you don't mind, I'd like to start with you. What is the current state of in the city of Pittsburgh for fleet electrification and this transition? You know, share with us a bit about your progress and what some of the city goals are.
Sure, thanks. So let's see. So we have a 100% fossil fuel free fleet goal that we set in 2015. So we have about 1,200 city fleet vehicles, which includes things like police horses and fire boats. So I don't know that we'd necessarily decarbonize all of those, but it's a thought anyway, just to group them together. But yeah, so our goal is 100% fossil fuel free fleet. Also from our climate action plan, we have 100% renewable energy generation. So we tie those together so that we're not, just subbing, like a coal focused grid for gas powered vehicles. So we so far have 36, I believe, Chevy Bolts in our fleet. So they're mostly just sedans. We started with our permits, licensing, and inspections vehicles, so mostly building inspectors. But we are now getting into some pretty exciting territory as the technology gets better. So we'll be introducing new electric refuse trucks coming up soon. We just got a grant from the EPA for that. Pittsburgh is super hilly, so we were didn't want to meddle too much with any basic services and needs before we had it down pat. We've installed to supplement the fleet vehicles needs. We've also installed some level 2 chargers around the city. So we have one installation that was for 30 plugs. We have 10 solar chargers, and then we'll be required to install a dedicated DC fast charger for each of those refuse trucks. So that's pretty energy intensive.
Excellent. And share, you have quite a comprehensive plan in terms of accessibility and identifying neighborhoods. And I know that you were also looking at Pittsburgh's public charging access. And so could you share with us a little bit about the stakeholder engagement process and how that is, been effective, or where it's maybe, could use a little bit of help?
Sure. So we and stakeholders, we haven't done a whole lot of community engagement around this yet, but stakeholder engagement, we've been really intentional about working very closely with our parking authority, which is an authority of the city that owns a ton of surface lots and garages throughout the city. So most of their public charging currently, at least to start, was concentrated downtown near office buildings. But we really wanted to think a little more intentionally about like making sure that we get into neighborhoods, especially neighborhoods that have mostly on-street parking and people don't necessarily have driveways. So we started to map out where all of our existing parking assets might be. So all those parking authority assets plus city parks and city rec centers, and we're gonna do a fire station coming up soon. But thinking about where in communities those might be located and how we might start to prioritize those spaces for EV development. One thing that passed recently that I'm pretty excited about that just got triggered for the first time is a new ordinance, a city ordinance for city facilities. So anytime that we're touching a building with a significant retrofit or doing new construction, or definitely if we're touching the parking lot, it now triggers an EV readiness ordinance. So we've been working with our facilities division to make sure that I think it's 20% of spaces are EV ready, and then 20 or 30% are EV capable or something like that. But yeah, super excited about that one, and it's been triggered once so far.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. I want to kind of shift gears a little bit over to Sergio, who probably has the award for longest connection to join this virtual panel. But Sergio, please, you worked for some time on the NLX project in Chile, which I think, you were involved in early stages, sort of what Rebecca was talking about with planning and early conversions of portions of the fleet. Kind of talk us a little bit through what that journey has been like for Santiago and where you started. I know that there were a couple of hiccups in the beginning, but then now, it's really exciting to see the scale that's been achieved.
Yes, Peter, as you told, there is no easy way or easy, there is some difficulties to make this transition between the diesel vehicles to electrification, to electromobility, and much more if you're talking to in the public transport, because the public transport, at least here in Chile, the companies were used to certain business model that includes diesel. They have all their depots equipped with diesel infrastructure. Their pilots were already trained with certain schedules to charge diesel into the buses. Also, all the mechanics that are related to these buses were very known, which all the mechanics of each operator. So there was no need basically to change from one technology of diesel from to electrification, a fleet that was powered by electricity. So why we want to make these things? So in this, to make this big step, it was very important to have the support of the government, and also some the support of some operators that want to make a change, that trust in us to test this technology and see if it will really fit to our city. Santiago is also a city that is not plain. It had a lot of ongoings and like hills during the city, so maybe it was not fit the electromobility for a city like us. But we have the support of the government. In 2007, we presented this project with a pilot of 2 electric buses. We have a operator that was interested in this project, wanted to test this technology in their buses. We form an alliance between the government, between the operators, between us. Each one of us putting a lot of effort in this project. And the government approved this project. The operator wanted to make some investment in the depots so the buses can charge them in these places. And after a few tests, a few problems with the chargers, with electricity, after we have tested the pilots and all the mechanics to start to know the bus and how it works, slowly, step by step, a lot of operators start to get interested in this technology, and they start to ask about these buses, how they work, how about if we can show them our analysis of the buses, of the consumption, of the autonomy, how was the achievement of the batteries. Also, another brands of buses were interested in this performance. So we start to asking questions if they can test the buses, if we can show them the data, etc. So that was a slow process. The next year, in 2008, we bought 50 buses plus, and until we can proudly say that from 2017, when we incorporated the 2 first buses in our country, now we are hoping that the next year, 2023, we have at least 1,600 buses operating currently in Chile. So it's a huge number. It's a very big evolution. But as I told you before, there is not an easy transition that only one company can make by itself. You have to be supported by the government, and also you need operators that are able to make this change and make effort to this to happen.
Yeah, and that if I'm doing my math in my head right, that's a 16x increase in roughly 5 years. Ryan, as a representative of a utility, what does a 16x increase in demand for electric mobility of public buses, how does that make you feel?
Personally, it makes me feel great because I'm all very supportive of decarbonizing transportation. As a utility, I think that means a lot of extra load, probably some upgrades to the local grid, and probably some planning decisions that need to be made far out in the future from a statewide basis as well. I'm kind of thinking about my time over at NISO for a little bit there, thinking about how we would look out to the future, figure out how we can make sure that the grid still works.
Well, and so let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned support from the state. Talk about some of the goals and motivation of the project, the program that you're working on. And, you've obviously got a lot of stakeholders as well. You've got the ISO, you've got, your own organization, you've got state government, you've got these large fleet owner operators. Share with us, maybe a little bit about what you've learned or where you see some opportunities.
Yeah, so the EV Power Ready program in Con Edison is a statewide program. We are responsible for the city of New York and Southern Westchester, which is our service territory. And so the goal that was set for us was to build at least 18,500 L2 plugs and 450 DCFC plugs by the end of 2025. This is part of the city and state's larger goal to decarbonize the economy from top to bottom. So similar to Rebecca, we have a 100% carbon-free generation mandate by 2040. And then we also have an 85% economy-wide reduction in CO2 emissions below 1990 levels by 2050. This was all part of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act that was passed a few years ago. So obviously decarbonizing transportation is a massive and essential piece of that. Yeah, from a stakeholder perspective, it's interesting. We have a large sort of portfolio of developers and folks that we engage with kind of across the industry, we are focused on light duty right now. Medium heavy duty is sort of a separate effort that we expect to ramp up in the near future. But from the light duty side, it kind of depends on the use case and the charger type. So for L2, we're seeing a lot of interest in multi-unit developments in apartment buildings. So that's kind of similar to the charge at home model, charging a garage model. But again, living in New York City, extremely dense urban territory, not a lot of people have garages, not a lot of people have places to park that's not on the side of the street. So what we're seeing is our program provides higher incentives for publicly accessible chargers. So even if you're a apartment complex and you're looking to build chargers, some of those folks are looking to go publicly accessible to get those higher incentives. And it's possible out here because a lot of those multi-unit developments they have garages like on the ground floor or bottom floor, but they're run by third parties. So it's a little bit easier to kind of manage that. On the DCFC side, it's sort of a totally different population of folks. We've got commercial fleets that we're working with, and we have rideshare networks that we're working with as well to build out sort of the centralized hub model that sort of looks like a gas station kind of, but obviously much more futuristic. And it's interesting when you have a rideshare company that is building a publicly accessible hub. So you have like an anchor tenant, and then you also have the accessibility for folks that are coming off the road to charge. And so the big benefit of that is, space is very hard to come by in the city. And so it's a really economic solution to solving both the I don't know where to park and I need a charge and there's nowhere to go. So the other benefit too is that a lot of these centralized hubs are it's able to bring electrification to LMI population through the ride-hailing driver base, as well as where a lot of the locations are. So a lot of these hubs are being built on old industrial sites or old factory sites that have really large interconnections that they're not using that power anymore.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Go where the connection is already there rather than having to build a new one. You touched upon a number of things, Ryan, that I want to pivot over to Karen about, which is, Karen, you've been working with utilities for a long time. I know that you were closely involved with the EV Match partnership that NLX has established, that's focused on sharing of charging and infrastructure, and all that kind of plays into different equity programs and accessibility programs. Share with us, you represent a technology provider ultimately, right? And NLX offers a variety of technologies beyond simply charging stations, but the ability to charge with renewables, to store batteries, and to also potentially vehicle to grid technologies and leveraging those batteries for demand response markets, which is another sort of prosumer model. So just share with us your perspective on where things have been, what have been some successful projects and opportunities, and where there's some sort of complexity that organizations responsible for this need to think through.
Yeah, so I think you hit the nail right on the target, right? So the EV industry is a very early growth stage. I mean, I would say compared to other technologies out there, that's been over a decade or more in terms of development and strategy. So it makes it exciting and difficult at the same time. Exciting because in the tech world, that means we get to be like really nimble, innovative, do projects and pilot programs with utilities to ensure at the site level, everybody has something that is going to accommodate to what their problem is, and being really driving the innovation side to ensure there are specific mandates that might come along with these pilot scenarios that utilities are oftentimes calling their current projects. So Enel's done a lot of projects leveraging renewable assets at the utility level, things like leveraging wind in Hawaii for overnight residential charging to absorb excess solar that might come in during daytime peaks. So we think of EVs as large batteries on wheels, right? So how do we leverage these large batteries on wheels to ensure, one, we're hitting those goals that the utilities are really trying to drive in terms of GHG reduction, and then also whatever their current investment is in terms of their service territory. So to your point, technologies like EV Match, we're able to use that peer-to-peer concept on residential charging, open up those stations really to allow those multi-unit dwelling that wants to take a piece of, the revenue aspect that could be shared in reselling the energy when their tenants are not parked at specific spaces during daytime. And then also giving that, availability to what we're experiencing out here in California, which is long wait times in terms of finding a charger that's available, that's publicly available, and then also leveraging those like utility incentives to make sure those economics work. So at the local level, I think also we do consider things like, hey, does a specific site already have on-site storage? So if they're converting into fleets, how do we ensure we're using that storage capacity to charge up their fleet vehicles so that the transition and the cost savings that they're expecting from these types of transition is also factored in? And so to my point, I think it's really exciting because it's such a new industry, but at the same time, without the regulatory side and policy to say, hey, these are the market standards that we have to follow, to Ryan's point, it's really hard to grab data that's really effective for the utilities to make better decisions. We already know that there's going to be capacity strain. They're doing all they can to do grid planning efforts out here in California, but not having that telematics on the OEM side that has a cohesive API that we can all pull from to provide the utilities adequate data to make better decisions and investments on their side is really what the hurdle is, right? So the early stage has its advantages, but then the lack of policy and standards is also problematic in terms of the growth, because it's very expensive if, let's say, out here in California, they just implemented something called a CTEP requirement, right? It's really hard to actually deploy these standards once the equipment's out in the field. It's really expensive to rip and replace things. And then a lot of times it requires hardware changes like UL that it means that we have to update the equipment out in the field. So looking at, what we're doing out here in California and globally in the European market really helps utilities, get that, strategy in place, and then making sure like the industry actually has some standards to follow so that we could avoid, costly infrastructure upgrades in the future.
Sure. And you mentioned something with the tenants wanting to take advantage of when chargers that are installed might not want to be or might not be in use, and that connected some dots with what Rebecca and the city of Pittsburgh's plan has around accessibility for charging. And Vinny, I know that you and the Arab team have done some really interesting work in this space. To me, I was listening to a panel earlier today, actually with one of our colleagues from Brazil, and we mentioned how office space in general is not utilized 40% of the time, right? And vehicles, I think, sit something like 90% of the time. And Vinny, with the work that you've done through Arab on accessibility from a community perspective, but also just your understanding of built environment and design. I'm wondering if you could just share some perspectives on sort of planning and execution and where those opportunities are being found. Ryan mentioned a great example of former manufacturing facilities, but I'm sure that's not the only one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important, especially in urban environments, to try and identify places where we can get the most out of the infrastructure, and being able to support municipal fleets or specific types of fleets while also supporting public charging. One of the things that we noted when we were working with New York City DOT, kind of the early days of their EV planning, was if you look at fleets and people who own private vehicles in cities, the math just kind of tells the story in terms of how you want to approach this. You really should be starting from the fleet side. In New York City, for example, you have 1,300 buses. That's just city buses, not school buses or commuter buses. 30,000 municipal vehicles, 50,000 plus, probably closer to 100,000 rideshare and taxi vehicles, and then 100,000 trucks moving through the city. That's a lot of vehicles, but it's about 10-ish% of all the private vehicles in the city. And and they're probably operating the same or more miles on a daily basis, just because the private vehicle owner, to your point, is driving maybe 7 miles a day, and sitting dormant the rest of the time. So fleet transition can really support equity through providing clean transportation options. That can be through encouraging rideshare drivers to transition, or by providing car share services co-located with municipal charging, things like that. Buses and trucks contribute to poor air quality in urban environments, obviously, and so tackling those first is a climate and public health win-win for sure. But those supporting those projects can also benefit in terms of the trickle down innovation that happens, and supporting smaller fleets as they want to transition. And these vehicles, to the circularity point, like, they have a life beyond their use within the fleets. So these can be recycled or reused for car share programs, things like that, secondhand car sales to people who would not be able to purchase a new EV. And so those are some of the things that we've looked at. I mean, the kind of research we've been talking about, looking at, is understanding that everybody, every fleet owner is coming at this from a different perspective, right? They're starting at a different place. They have different types of vehicles. Their vehicles do different things during the day. How do we identify the right charging approaches for them? And some of that is based on looking at the data, but some of it is really just thinking about talking to the owners and understanding their appetites for risks or changes within how they approach their operations. So I guess to your earlier point, the stakeholder engagement and the upfront discussions on goals and what we want to get out of this, do we purely want to transition the vehicles, or do we want to stack these benefits on the building side, the facility side, is an important conversation to have up front.
So I want to earmark something that I'm going to follow up on that you just mentioned about the charge profile and utilization, but first shift gears over to Rebecca on a question we received in the chat, which is, as you're trying to roll out this plan, are you experiencing pushback at the city level when trying to address this transition? You mentioned you're looking at some refuse vehicles, so you're working with the Department of Sanitation, but you've also got a larger fleet of other light duty vehicles. You're working with the parking authority as well. So how has that been? Are you receiving pushback? Are you getting all the right folks at the table?
Yeah, we're totally receiving pushback. I mean, like, especially thinking about some of those larger vehicles, like the refuse trucks, I think they're $500,000 each, whereas a diesel truck is only $250,000. So, in a city, like, we're a small city and we're pretty scrappy. So we're always kind of hard pressed for fleet vehicles anyway. Like, they last well beyond their useful life. So yeah, transitioning those over to electric comes with a lot of anxiety from, those fleet operators and the public works director. Grants, supplementing with grants, we've been really good at, getting as many grants as we possibly can. But yeah, we've gotten some pushback in that area because it does eat up budget. Although, we're working through that. And then we don't operate our bus system. It's a county bus system, but kind of the same story there, where the cost is pretty high and the wait time is pretty long too. But we're pushing through anyway. Actually, one interesting pushback that we got that I just thought of was we're redoing a firehouse, and actually the firehouse architect, developer, contractor was really concerned about fire risk in the firehouse with an electric fire truck hookup. So we kind of had to talk them down from that ledge and maybe think about, trialing it out, because they park inside. So that's kind of the issue there. So yeah, just thinking about, training, getting as many grants as we possibly can, trying to ease the anxiety of any of those fleet operators so that we make sure we're really modeling those trucks to exactly what their need is going to be as we start to move out of the sedans. But that's why we tried to get all our hiccups out with the sedans first.
Well, I want to revisit the firehouse and that risk. You're all providing me with notes for follow-up. But going back to what Vinny had said about charge profile, and you just echoed, Rebecca, knowing that you have to get that right, and some of the pushback was around the cost. I want to shift over to Sergio, because I know that when speaking with you and your team, there was a lot of diligence in, number one, the manufacturer and the battery sort of load profile and performance. Santiago being very hilly, like Pittsburgh, for example, and dealing with those same air quality issues, right? And so you started a little earlier. You started, we're talking 2017 was the first one, and now we're up to 1,600 by next year. Those batteries, as an example, are helping to provide an added benefit from a circularity perspective in terms of the cost. So if you could maybe try to articulate the financing model. I believe it was government-backed support for the operators of the fleets, and then those operators are then taking revenue from ridership as well, and that's going to NLX, which is primarily fully financing the fleet, right, and effectively financing the deal, and then they're working directly with the OEM. So as you sit at year 5, let's say, almost year 6, and you look ahead to the end of that 10-year contract, 2 questions. 1, how is the economics working out for everybody? And then 2, what about the decommissioning considerations for those buses?
Well, asking your first question, the information that we are getting from the buses is way much better than we thought at the beginning. We have recently made some tests in the first buses that we have been operating, not in the ones from 2017, because there were only 2 buses, but from 2019 and so on, to check how was the performance, mainly of the batteries, because you should know now that the batteries are now more than the 70 or 60% of the cost of the e-bus is the battery. So the one thing that you have to keep an eye on in the buses is the battery. And we ran some tests, and the battery degradation was way less than the manufacturers told us that it will be. It shows that at the 10-year term that we is the last payment of the buses, when the buses are the battery has like complete their useful life. It should be at least degraded to 70%. So during that time, you have used only the 30% of the capacity of the battery, and the life duration it's only the 30%. But it's supposed that the year 5 it will to be like 15, something like that percent, and it was only 12 or 10% in some buses. So the performance is really great. The operators are really taking care of the batteries. We have a model like the software that checks the battery status every day, and it's really like having good results all this project. So we are very proud of how the operators have been going with it, and also how have they been reducing their cost also of the purchase, not in the purchase but in the energy provision compared to diesel. And also in the operation itself, the maintenance is very different from the diesel. You reduce your cost more than 60% from the maintenance from the diesel buses. So it's really only good news out of this incorporation of electromobility.
And as I recall, that was also partly due to a power purchase agreement. So the buses are charged, 100% with renewable energy. At a fixed cost, right? So there's no variability in the market or volatility.
No, that's worked only because the software that I will tell you about. Because in Chile you have different like cost of energy depending on the hour at the hour that you charge the buses. So we set our software so that the buses are charged only in the period of time that the cost of the electricity is lower. So you don't have variation of the cost of the electricity. So that's also make that the operators know exactly, not exactly, but a range of amount of electricity that they are going to consume during a month. And as you answered also your second question about the decommission, and now we are also now in the middle of the contract, halfway more or less, and we are start thinking what we are going to do with those batteries, because the buses can still be used in the public transport, not the batteries, because the manufacturers recommend not to be used after they have 30% of degradation. And now we are starting some pilots, run some tests, and we are trying to give a second life to these batteries, maybe to heat some swimming pools, to use as a depot to illuminate the depots of the same operators, maybe to use them as energy cores for some illumination from stadiums, some schools. Maybe in your house you can have a second life battery used in case that the electricity is shut down. Here we have a lot of earthquakes and mini earthquakes, so sometimes the electricity is shut off because of that reason, and this could be a backup system for houses, for buildings, for hospitals. So we have like a tremendous amount of options that you could use with batteries, and it's a market that is not well developed here in Chile. There will be at least in 10 years more 1,600 batteries to be disposal, and we have to manage something to do with that. So we are thinking our way of to see which project we can develop with those.
Yeah, I love the the story of the job retraining, the retraining. I recall hearing even of the drivers of how you use the accelerator and braking models to optimize.
Yes.
And that, knowing that you can create shared value in the community at the end of this 10-year period, while the air quality and environmental justice issues have been addressed and the financials have panned out for all of the players. I want to quickly go back to Rebecca's comment about the firehouse location and risk, and maybe ask Ryan and Karen each to chime in kind of quickly. As I understand it, New York City is one of the most strict and stringent markets as it relates to battery energy storage and probably to charging. And so curious from the utilities perspective and as well from the technology providers perspective, we've seen some scary headlines, but that has by and large been mitigated as I understand it. So what are your thoughts on that as a founded concern versus a manageable risk and the associated benefits from making the transition?
Karen, did you want to start or?
You can go first. I mean,
Okay.
I have some perspectives. I don't think it's just New York City that's a problem. So yeah, if you wanted to go.
Yeah, I'll speak a little bit to the battery energy storage systems a little bit, because I do remember some discussions about that a few years ago. I know there were some concerns about putting lithium-ion batteries in pre-war buildings that are over 100 years old without good sprinkler systems, and that was kind of one of the main concerns with the fire department. I think they've come to some code decisions or conclusions that have allowed for batteries to be deployed in New York City. I don't necessarily think in those pre-war walk-ups like the one that I live in, but in and around the city, and like you said, it is extremely dense. So if one building catches on fire, then you got issues pretty much on the entire block. So from an EV charging perspective, we haven't seen as much pushback on this from the fire department. where we do see some areas for improvement are with the electric code as a whole in New York City. We are still on an older electric code from a lot of the city, and so it limits what we can do from a managed charging perspective using software versus hardware. We still really only allow hardware for managed charging, but we have seen that a lot of managed charging, that's where a lot of the innovation is with developers that are trying to build particularly DCFC sites. We see a lot of, it's a great way to mitigate the need for updates, or sorry, for upgrades, for grid upgrades, while still getting the maximum out of your site. Because, you know, from a utilization standpoint, we're not quite there yet as an industry where all, you know, 20 of your chargers are going to be used at full power at any given time. There's still a lot of power sharing that can be done that can still give the user like a full charge and a great experience.
I think from the New York side, I actually want to compliment Con Ed and their program and how smoothly that it's gone in terms of permitting and electric installation for EV charging side. I think we have more problems out here in California because it's regulated from city to city in terms of permitting poles. So we actually have a lot of problems here in Silicon Valley getting permits. But in the Con Ed program, they've been very efficient. I think it's just because they're so stringent in terms of their electric code and getting licensing that the process has been very smooth in terms of any type of installation work that we have to do. But one thing, you know, on the policy side that's a little bit frustrating is like the EV charging aspect of things is never grouped with other renewables. So to my point, I think that's where in the regulatory standpoint, there needs to be a lot more discussions on how do we leverage maybe the storage capacity and still use, you know, funds that might be eligible for having a stationary battery installed with the EV battery that might be more mobile and fitting in those specific codes that Ryan had talked about. But right now, because from a regulatory standpoint, like EV regulatory and filings are completely separate from other renewables, it's really hard to take advantage or value stack some of these incentives that might be available in multiple ways at this point. And then I haven't really seen any state really take advantage of, you know, even on the demand response side to loop in the EV charging outside of residential charging to consider filing things that are a little bit more cohesive and aligned with EV charging. It's just everything's so separated at this point that it's really hard to scale up from beyond like specific pilot projects, to my point.
I really appreciate the perspective, and I think, you know, one thing that we've learned with Sergio and the work of the team in Chile is that we have to start with pilots. We have to figure this stuff out, and it sounds like everything is kind of in transition, and so we've got about 5-6 minutes left, and I just want to give everybody a brief opportunity to share with the audience, you know, what your sort of key takeaways are, or key takeaway is from your experience, and also what gives you hope? What gives you hope in this transition, and what gives you sort of confidence that we're going to achieve this transition in a sustainable and circular way? I'll start with Rebecca.
I guess key takeaway for me, the installation was the most complicated part. And we've done one big installation. The next two are getting easier, but making sure that you engage the utility upfront and really early, because there is a wait time there, has been really important. So, you know, we've developed a much stronger partnership with our utility after our first project, but they were a really important partner in that aspect. And then what gives me hope? I mean, I think a lot of the used EVs that are coming out on the market, I just got one, which is really exciting. So yeah, I think that, you know, as they start to become more affordable and available, I think that, you know, they're not going to be such a weird niche, you know, thing for a certain amount of users. I think that, you know, everybody's going to be interested in electric vehicles and making sure that they can charge their car.
Ryan, how about you?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna take the takeaway from Karen that our energy services department is doing a great job. So I'll make sure to pass that along. But what I think what gives me hope, I'm optimistic about the transition here in New York. I think we've got a lot of strong policy that is driving that innovation, that is driving the need to innovate. And I think you kind of feel the momentum building out here, at least in transportation. The momentum has definitely been growing on the generation side. We're starting to get our first large scale offshore wind development is starting up in the next couple of years. And once you can clean up the grid, you can clean up the rest of the economy. And like Rebecca said, as soon as you have some more reasonably priced EVs that are a little bit easier to buy for folks, and you've got the clean grid, and you've got the places to charge, and you've got a clean heat program, and you've got building electrification programs, you start to see this sort of critical mass of decarbonization happening. And I think we are just hitting the sort of cresting inflection point, maybe a little bit earlier than where I kind of thought we were, but it is nice to kind of see, at least down here in New York, that that transition is genuinely gaining steam.
Karen, any rebuttal to your energy services remark? No, I'm kidding. What if there was one thing you could tell people looking to adopt a transition for their fleet that you think would be good for them to know, please share that. And then of course you've been working in the sector now for over a decade, more or less. What's giving you hope?
Yeah, so I think right now we're actually doing a lot of passenger vehicle transitions with corporations and enterprise companies where we're pushing them to actually charge at home. So there's a lot of even last mile delivery trucks or utility service personnel that are taking their trucks to home. And so it's a more cost-effective way for them to dip their toes in the water, look at the data, how aggressive do they want to transition. So that might be a good way for them to start evaluating transition plans, especially if they have GHG goals mandated by the government or any tax reduction things that they have to consider. And it's a great time because I think there's going to be a lot of public money that's available for that transition. But I think for the future, it's been pretty exciting. I mean, I think we're headed the right direction. It would be nice to see, I think on the automotive side, I mentioned some regulatory standards so that when we're getting data back to the utilities as a service that we provide under a NEL, we have some agnostic APIs that we can pull from versus having to integrate to every single large computer on wheels. So I think on the regulatory standpoint, like the utilities done a great job to kind of group the EV charging aspect of regulatory standards and what they expect. And then I think it just needs to be pushed a little bit more harder from that side on the automotive side, because I think that's where it's going to get a lot more complicated if we don't have some type of standards to follow for them to get accessibility to that data that you guys will need to better plan for the grid.
And Sergio, real quick, we're down to 2 minutes with three more comments to go. What have you learned?
Yes.
What's got you hopeful?
I have learned that the first thing that you have to keep in mind is to be very courage in the projects that you want to achieve. You have to put a lot of effort in them because there are a lot of people that is not trusting this in this technology at the beginning. There are all things that is like a thing like for fancy transport, only like to like a cool way to transport from one way to another. But I think that really is the future. So you have to try to make this change happen with this. I think the best way to do it is with the small pilots, the small testing projects, when the people can try this technology and see that it really have a lot of benefits in terms of cost, in terms of maintenance, in terms of energy consumption, and also in terms to green environment with the emissions that they produce. So you have to really focus in the performance of these buses and collect data so you can show the people that is not very clear about the benefit, but it can really work.
Great, thank you. And Vinny, we're right under the gun, and I'd like to give MK just a moment for some closing remarks from the Danish Clean Tech Hub. So,
Sure.
same
I'll try and be
question.
quick. I'll start with hope. Right now, I mean, kind of echoing what everybody said, but federal leadership is there. Thinking about the federal fleet, 600,000 vehicles are going to be transitioning over the next couple of decades. There's a direct climate impact, but that also spurs the market development that we need to ensure that this can happen more broadly. There's also a focus on equity, social benefits, and just thinking beyond the cost. So this federal money is going to support these types of programs to make sure that we can think about renewables, we can think about resilience in this process, and we can think about making sure that we're doing this in an equitable way, supporting the communities that were impacted by some of our past mistakes first in the process. Things like Justice 40 are great. And then just kind of quickly, a quick anecdote from this morning. There was an IKEA truck outside my building this morning blocking the driveway next door, and somebody was blaring on the horn trying to get out of the driveway. I went over to go see what was happening, and it was silent. And I looked, and the IKEA truck was across the street. I didn't hear the truck. I would have normally heard a very loud truck start, rev up, and then move across the street. It was a silent electric vehicle. There are actual tiny tangible benefits that are going to change people's lives. Things like that. We'll solve the horn thing, later, but for now, I think the idling is a great one.
No, that's great. Thank you. And thank you to all the panelists. Really enjoyed hearing your perspectives from a number of different angles. I'd like to just turn it over to MK for some parting thoughts. Thank you as well to the Circular City Week team.
Thank you, Peter, and all the events you're doing during Circular City Week. No, this has been a very refreshing session. Thank you all the panelists, also from the Circular City Week side. And I just want to extend a special thank you to Anel and Ara. You both are amazing partners as pioneer partners of the Circular City Week. And I think one key that I also really want to take with it is it's still the education part. I mean, we have bright minds sitting here. There are solutions available. Everything is kind of in line. And I think the education part, that needs to be that support, that push from the down. So thank you all for your groundwork that you're doing. And I hope that with Circular City, we can contribute a little bit to the conversations and the education part as well. And yes, thank you all.
And thanks for everybody who hung on a few minutes extra. Really appreciate it. And
thank you.
Look forward to the great rest of the week. Cheers all. Bye-bye.
Take care, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Hi, thanks. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity. Bye.